Good evening. Or in Hungarian, Jó estét kívánok. That's half of the Hungarian I know. But yeah, I was telling folks, it feels like I've been gone for a month. And I looked at the calendar, I've been gone for a month. So yeah, it's good to be back, and nice to see all the diligent, persevering faces that sticking with it. Um, yeah, tonight we've got a ton of stuff as usual, and Rafe has told me I have a hard stop, so I'm going to get right at it and talk about chapter 8, and I'm going to start around verse 7. Rafe introduced the chapter last week, and here, the topics are kind of easy. You got 3 trumpets. We're going to talk about wormwood a little bit because that's an interesting little discursus. And then finally, 4th trumpet. That was hard to do, you know. Yeah. Just to keep in mind, this, at the beginning of the chapter, Rafe talked about that heaven was silent for a half hour. Now, you just wonder, were they watching the clock? Half hour, 30 minutes? But it seems to be that they were silent because they were awestruck by what was going to happen on this planet. And these 4 trumpets lay out some of the impact, some of the judgment that will happen, I think is happening and will happen into the future. And they're silent, they're awestruck. So we'll go over these trumpets and see what's happening. All right. So here's verse 7, the first trumpet. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire. 2 key words, and those 2 key words will link this passage back to some Old Testament passages that Heiser and others feel give us some insight into what we're encountering here. Mixed with blood, these were thrown upon the earth. 1/3 of the earth was burned up, 1/3 of the trees, and all green grass. All this work I put into my lawn, it's going to be gone. Just gone. Yeah, so arguments can be made that there are allusions here back to Exodus 9, the Egyptian plague, the day of the Lord from Zechariah, certainly Joel, actually a couple places in Joel, and then Ezekiel 38. That John he's drawing from a huge database of information that Jews knew about. They understood these allusions. When you see hail and fire together, hail and fire, I don't know, I've never seen that. Have you? Hail and fire, that's kind of odd. You don't expect hail and fire together. So when you see those, it's going to probably connect with some outstanding passages they're familiar with. So Beale and McDonough write that this is obviously a reference to the hail and fire of the Egyptian plague. When the Pharaoh refused to let the people go, this was one of the plagues that hit in Exodus chapter 9. So we see in 9:23 through 25, we see hail and fire, hail and fire, hail and fire. Yeah, it's a pretty obvious connection. That's not a commonplace event to have hail and fire. So it makes sense that hail and fire here is an indication that John is alluding to it. They say that both of these are about an affliction of hail and fire from heaven against 3 parts of creation. Sure, in the Egyptian plague, it was just limited to that country, obviously, but there was no limit to the extent. It covered the whole territory. Here we have a universalized plague, worldwide, but 1/3. So it's changed a bit, but the same idea, the same kind of devastating impact. Let's see, is there anything else? Then I'm going to go with Rafe's pronunciation, Un. It's simpler. Un. The eschatological destruction of 1/3 of various aspects of the cosmos is loosely based on Ezekiel 5:2. Well, Ezekiel 5:2 is a really bizarre passage. If anyone happened to be reading in Ezekiel and read 5:2, the Lord says to Ezekiel, "Oh, you son of man, take a sharp sword, use it as a barber's razor. Pass it over your head and your beard, so cut all your hair off on your head. take a third, you're going to burn it up in fire in the midst of the city when the days of siege are completed, and a third you're going to take and strike with the sword. Why do you strike hair with a sword? Strange. A third you're going to scatter to the wind. Well, what's significant here? Thirds. A third, a third, a third. Perhaps there's an argument to be made. And all of this now is limited to Jerusalem. So we have Egypt being judged, Jerusalem being judged, thirds. And now in Revelation, we're seeing a universalized judgment of a third. So 2/3 left. In Zechariah, there's another possible allusion John is drawing from. And it's the Lord is declaring that 2/3 shall be cut off and perish, 1/3 shall be left alive. And I'll put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver. It's a judgment. It's talking about the day of the Lord. What's interesting about this is it's not delineating between believers and unbelievers. That everyone in this situation will be tested by this plague. But Beale argues that believers, the righteous, will be refined, where the unrighteous will be punished. And somehow the righteous will be preserved in all of this. And so even though there's some devastating judgments here, these scholars believe that the righteous, yes, they'll go through some nasty stuff, but will somehow be preserved and refined through it. You're going to have judgment here in Ezekiel, but a third is spared. Perhaps those are the righteous. All right. The next option, a guy by the name of Steve Moise, he writes that there are parallels between Revelation and Joel and Amos. And it does make some sense. You got 4 trumpets we've talked about in Revelation. We've talked about the first one anyway. But we got fire, sun, and moon, which the rest of them will refer to those. Joel 2 talks about it. Locust, scorpions, smoke and locusts in Joel 3. You can see the comparison. So guess what? Scholars disagree. It's amazing, isn't it? Just astonishing. And what does Heiser usually say when you run into this? He goes, could be all of them. We don't know. But on the other hand, I think it's probably easy to say there is a judgment connection here, that John is alluding to past prophetic judgments being made on Egypt, being made on Jerusalem, and he's expanding that now to the world. And this language would be immediately identifiable to the Jews. Yes, we're talking about judgment here. Things are going to be bad. This isn't a good thing that's going to happen. All right. Second and third trumpet. So the first trumpet, hail and fire, a third of much of what's important to us will be gone. Revelation 8 and 9, the second angel now blows his trumpet, and something like a great mountain, and we've seen some of the allusions in the past. What does a great mountain refer to? Burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea, we got another third, becomes blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Well, that's kind of interesting. We've got ships now. We haven't talked about ships to this point. The third angel blows his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch. Got another third of the rivers, springs of water. Name of this star is Wormwood. That's why we're going to talk about wormwood in a minute. Pull that out and see what that's all about. A third of the waters became wormwood. How does that work? And many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. Well, what does this all mean? Let's see. So Beale says the likeness of a mountain could be metaphorical for a kingdom. We talked about the cosmic mountain of God, referring to God's kingdom. Mountains often refer to a king and kingdom. Could be God's kingdom, could be another deity, could be another domain. But this idea of a mountain is often referring to a kingdom. Fire in the apocalypse elsewhere is an image of judgment. So if you're going to throw a fiery mountain somewhere, a burning mountain. It talks about judging an evil kingdom. Well, what evil kingdom do we talk about a lot? Babylon. Yeah, we're going to see there's some connection here. It's supported by Revelation 18. One strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone, threw it into the sea. The angel immediately interprets it for us. Thus will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence. Okay, so pretty good possibility here that this mountain is Babylon. And burning with fire, which is always a sign of judgment. It's rarely a good thing. Okay, let's see. Revelation 8 says, here's the problem. A lot of modern interpreters, especially when you get into some of the other end times chronologies, they want to literalize this. They talk about volcanoes exploding. Well, if you got a mountain and you got fire, it must be a volcano. So if a lot of volcanoes go off, maybe that's a sign of the last days of Christ returning. Probably not. A literal reading is rendered unlikely because John keeps alluding to these passages that are metaphorical. Now, you could counter-argue. There might be a counter-argument. When he's alluding to the plagues on Egypt, those weren't metaphorical. Those plagues are real. That's why the Egyptians let the Jews go. But in many cases, they're metaphorical. They're talking about images, metaphors that would be common knowledge to the Jews. Thanks, Rafe. Oh, Rafe, you clever little boy, you. All right. They didn't do it, Rafe, sorry. All right. This idea of destruction of ships. Destruction of ships. Anticipates description in chapter 18 of Revelation of complete destruction of the great city Babylon. And Babylon became wealthy and powerful because it had seafarers. It had lots of ships, lots of commerce. And the destruction of ships would have caused great, they would be quite upset. And chapter 18, we have this passage, every shipmaster sailed anywhere, every sailor, as many work in the sea, cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning. Who's burning? Babylon's burning. Okay? So Beale says, with the third trumpet, the judgment of famine appears to be continued. If you've got a third of the sea turning to blood, that's going to cause a problem. If you have commerce being shut down because ships are being sunk, you have foul, undrinkable water. We're going to talk about wormwood in just a minute. It's going to cause lots of problems. What slide am I on? I keep losing track of the number of the slide. 14, okay. Good. Yeah, so he says there's a lot of rabbinic literature, lots of midrash, interpretation, commentary on the Old Testament that interprets the plague on the waters as being a judgment on heavenly beings. So when Revelation refers back to the plagues of Egypt, a lot of the language can also be discussing this idea that Egypt had its Elohim over it, had its, in chapter 11 of Genesis, Yahweh puts the Elohim over the nations. When Yahweh punishes Egypt, he's also punishing that Elohim. He's judging the country, he's judging the men, he's judging the Elohim over it. So in Isaiah 24:21, there's support for this. The Lord will punish the host of heaven. Who's the host of heaven? The heavenly host. Yeah, it's Elohim, divine beings, on high, and the kings of the earth on earth. So there's a connection there. Yeah, the Lord's going to punish both the earthly leaders and the heavenly host who are misleading them or leading them astray. There's other rabbinic texts for the same kind of thing. There's a long discussion about, well, wait a minute, some of this stuff is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's not in the Masoretic tradition. And some of these guys are going to argue that during this time period, the Second Temple time period, there were probably multiple versions of the Masoretic tradition out there that became more solidified a little bit later on, and that this the Dead Sea Scrolls version that Heiser and some Beale is referring to here, connecting the judgment, the heavenly host judgment with the earthly kings, that was alive and present when the New Testament was being written. That would have been an available interpretation, an available way of thinking about some of these Old Testament passages. So Psalm 78, which paraphrases the Exodus plagues, saying God changed their rivers into blood, their streams, so that they could not drink, that reinforces this idea of possible starvation. Things are getting really bad. Now, the third trumpet has a great fireball being thrown from heaven, a star, a fireball. Not a great mountain. Now we have a great star. Well, what's a star a metaphor for in our discussions? Yeah, an angel, a divine being, an Elohim. So now we're having this concept of, we're not going to just judge Babylon, we're going to judge Babylon's star, Babylon's Elohim as well. So the stars represent angelic beings in Revelation and the Old Testament, and these angels often corporately represent an earthly people and kingdom. And again, fire's judgment. So, more judgment. These are the gods of the nations from Genesis 11. Beale talks more about this third trumpet. Affirms both the Egyptians and their guardian angel were judged at the Red Sea. So Exodus, we're seeing judgment of both the people and the Elohim. And First Enoch is support for this. Talks about fallen angels as stars like great burning mountains. Okay, now we're mixing metaphors. Stars and mountains. But again, burning is judgment. Mountains are kingdoms. Stars are angels. So the angels of kingdoms are being judged. Just plug in what the meaning of metaphors have been for us. And so we have fallen angels being punished with people, and that's our going back to that Deuteronomy 32 worldview. The idea of Genesis 11, where Yahweh put Elohim over the nations, and eventually they will be judged. They will die like mortals. Psalm talks about it, Psalm 82. The fallen angels that we've talked about. That's what causes a lot of these problems. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna burning star, an angel of divine judgment. Okay, we've kind of chatted about that. And angelic represent evil. Okay, I think we've got that. Here the judgment is in view. So, all right, we can move along. What about wormwood? Wormwood, interesting. Isn't wormwood one of C.S. Lewis's? Yeah, interesting. All right, well, wormwood is a word that the ESV Study Bible is a note. It's a plant, with a bitter tasting extract that's derived from it. The Greek Septuagint doesn't have that same word that John's using here, the same Greek word. But there's a little bit of confusion. Is it a poison that kills, or is it something bitter that makes one uncomfortable, that turns water bitter, that it's just a discomfort, a judgment, but not necessarily leading to death? And so these scholars are saying it's probably not leading to death. In fact, it was used medicinally in the 2nd century AD in Cappadocia in Turkey, and it was used to get rid of intestinal what are the things that parasites? Thank you. Yes. And kills intestinal worms. Those are fun, I'm sure. All right, so what else? What are we saying about wormwood here? Well, a guy named Silva says, okay, the effect here the effect of what causes death, whereas wormwood, at least as we understand the term, is bitter but not poisonous. The author may have in mind a different substance, or he's connecting, which is a typical way of using language in this time period, that bitterness and poison are connected, but it's not necessarily a poison to death. It's just bad. It's bad for you. You want to stay away from it. And wormwood is equated with gall. And Jesus was offered gall on the cross. Well, it would be bitter, but that wouldn't have killed him. Okay. Okay. No, it could be that the consummation of all these things, a lot of people died from. Certainly bitterness doesn't help, but I don't think it's, at least the scholars here are arguing that's not a direct cause of death, if we take their word for it. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, so what translation you got? New World or? Yeah, you know, it's funny when you read the back notes that Heiser sends out there. They debate each one of these issues, but in the end, you kind of have to, you know, who makes the best argument? Do you feel like it's leading to death or not? Yeah. People died. Probably starvation, probably the combined impact of these judgments. You're going to have a lot of people starving anyway, just because commerce is reduced. A lot of the land became useless. Ships weren't sailing, that sort of thing. Okay. Metaphor was chosen to show that judgment was well suited to the crime because the prophets polluted Israel with idolatry. So God is going to pollute the water. Yeah. Everywhere else in the Old Testament, it represents severe affliction resulting from divine wrath. Again, connecting to idolatry. But it's not necessarily directly causing death. Again, according to Beale and some of the others. Okay. In Revelation 8:11, Babylon, the prevailing world system, has influenced earth dwellers, and the consequence of that is going to be pollution, judgment on both Babylon and those under its sway. Against does not unleash a woe which water becomes literally poison. This is Beale. Rather, the tone is one of judgment that brings bitter suffering. Okay, including death. So. I know, but Larry, that doesn't seem to match your translation. It's a stretch. But his point here is, too, that it's not just outsiders. It's going to be those who are faithful to Yahweh. We're all kind of in the same mix here. We will be suffering the result of these judgments together. Yeah. How many is many? Yeah. Okay, the fourth trumpet. Angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, a third of the stars, a third of their light might be darkened. Okay, so now we have a plague of darkness, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, a third of the night. Then I looked up and heard an eagle crying, this is interesting, with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead. Woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blast of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. That doesn't sound good. Yeah, so we have a couple of things happening here. Un says it's a mere coincidence that we have that on the fourth day of creation, God is reported to have made the sun, moon, and the stars. So this is kind of a cosmic deconstruction. We have a plague of darkness that reverses this day of creation, fourth day of creation, and revert to a pre-4-day chaos. The noun, okay, for this eagle thing is fascinating. It's John taking another swipe at Greek gods. You kind of have to look behind the scenes here to get, to get that message. But the noun Mizora Nema, mid-heaven, is the word used to describe overhead. So when it says the eagle flew overhead, it's using that Greek term, which literally means mid-heaven. Not just, that translation's pretty bad. Overhead, mid-heaven is what it means. The Jews had a magical amulet, sun, moon, two stars, and it reads, one God in the heavens who exists and who pre-exists, who is greater than all, who dominates all the beings in mid-heaven. Mid-heaven is a reference to the throne of heaven, to the source of power in heaven. So you got this eagle flying over, and the eagle is a common reference or a messenger of Zeus. It's also equated to the Pegasus star or constellation, and which was thought to be in mid-heaven. It was the king, if you will, of the star constellations. So we have this usurpation of Zeus again, who's considered to be the most high god within the Greek pantheon. And we remember John talking about that. So today's, who are the stars? Who's the Pegasus? Who's the eagle? Who sits on the throne in our culture? Un wants to say, if John were writing today, he'd speak against, he says, the gods of science. I would say the gods of scientism, who argue that science is the only source of knowledge. We're not against science. We're against those who say there is no knowledge outside of science, evolution, humanism, and atheism. So, the word translated here, mid-heaven, is a technical term in astrology, and we've talked about astrology in the past, and astronomy. The eagle occupies the position of the constellation Pegasus. Its location is very significant, mid-heaven. This is because frequently in all the charts, it holds the principal place. This is known as the center of the universe in ancient times. So this little phrase, an eagle flew overhead, is just packed with metaphorical references to Greek gods, Zeus, and of course, John is going to dethrone. This is a lot of information we probably don't need to know. That the leader of the stars from the divinity Anu, they would connect in Babylon these constellations to another god, obviously not Yahweh, and not Zeus. So you have a progression. The Greeks had Zeus, the Babylonians had Anu in this case, and the constellation was the Babylonian Thunderbird, the flying eagle, later, to be called Hippos, which means an awful lot to all of you, I'm sure. All right. Well, boy, I've just rocketed through this stuff, Rafe. You're going to have all kinds of time. Okay, so John's theology is the judgment of Babylon and its gods. It's what's happening with the first four trumpets. Zeus isn't on the throne. His Babylonian equivalent isn't on the throne. Okay. The God of Israel's on the throne. Yeah, we got that. Oh, I thought that was mine. And the God who is the Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, who's going to punish those who are persecuting the people who are loyal to him. He's taking our minds back to the Old Testament and the judgment of Babylon. Babylon was the prime persecutor of the people of God in the Old Testament. And then you have the Egyptians, you have Babylon, you have at the time of John, the Roman Empire, and yet today there are powers, there are kingdoms that aren't favorable towards followers of Yahweh even today. God is going to judge those kingdoms. Well, we talked a little bit about this idea of recapitulation or linear chronology of Revelation. It seems like John is going over and over judgment, Babylon is being equated to whatever imperial power is present, whatever kingdom is present. God will judge those kingdoms, versus a linear chronology. It even echoes back to the Gog and Magog passages in Ezekiel. It refers to the final end-time defeat of Gog by the Lord. I will judge him with blood and sweeping rain and hailstones, and will rain fire on him. So, again, connection all the way back to Ezekiel that John's making with his language. Sounds like Revelation 8. Jewish exegetical tradition used Ezekiel 38 in connection with the hail plague tradition and applied it to end times. Well, what are the bottom shelf cookies? First four trumpets describe the coming judgment of Babylon and its gods. And obviously we're talking about a modern day Babylon, because it's going to happen. It is happening and will happen. For the most part, Revelation's not designated to be read as a linear chronology, but it's going to recapitulate this judgment process. Second coming is cloaked in mystery, just like the first. Yeah, we'd love for a chronology, wouldn't we? Just lay it out. Show me a chart. I want to know when and how. My wife is still upset with me that maybe the rapture isn't going to happen like we thought. And so is Karen. But I was thinking about this the other day. Of course, Jesus talked about there'd be birth pangs. There'd be an increasing frequency of the things right before he comes. I can lay out a system where, all right, we're in this millennium. We're experiencing judgment. It has increased over time. I think Rafe's mentioned last century, the 20th century, was one of the bloodiest, was the bloodiest century for humankind. And there were more martyrs during that time period than the previous 19 centuries. So maybe things are speeding up. Maybe we are going to see a more rapid, one after another event. There are wars going on all over the world right now. And we could be living in that time of judgment. But it is going to get worse. Be overcomers. Don't leave your first love. John is warning us. When you think that there was a 30-minute pause in heaven when this was all being considered, I don't care if it was 25 minutes or 45, whatever it was, they were awestruck by what God was planning. And John's given us just this bit of a view into what's going to happen, and it's awesome, not in a positive way, but God will redeem, his people. And we may not all live through it, but we will be glorified. All right, Rafe, I'm leaving you lots of time.
So I'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
There you go. So you can choose to use your break however you want. You can ask Don questions, or you can go to the restroom, get food. You can ignore him. Okay, we're going to get started here in about a minute. There's a pair of glasses up here. I don't know if it belongs to anybody in here, probably our Promised Land staff. Okay. So did everybody read Revelation 9, 1 through 6? Got that memorized? All right. Well, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to hit the highlights. And so let's get going. So the fifth angel blew his trumpet. I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth. Not falling, but fallen, past tense. Given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. From the shaft rose smoke. Smoke's about judgment. From the smoke came locust on earth. They're told not to harm. Now, Don talked about harming grass and plants. Well, they're told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but to only harm those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So they were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not to kill them. And people are going to seek death, but will not find it. Death is going to flee from them. Now these locusts were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what looked like, like crowns of gold. And their faces were like human faces. And their hair like women's hair. And their teeth like lion's teeth. They had breastplates like of iron. And the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots. They have tails and stings like scorpions. And they have king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he's called Apollyon. So, first thing you got to know, these are not modern war weapons. Verse 5, it says they were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not what? Kill them. Modern war weapons would do what? Kill them. Yeah. So, if these are weapons, people are going to die. So rather than futuristic modern weaponry, this imagery can all be drawn from the Old Testament. So let's talk about the star fallen from heaven. Verse 1, you got a star fallen from heaven to earth. So contextually, it's pretty obvious the fallen star is a supernatural being, right? Stars, supernatural beings. So the 3 questions before us are right here. Is this being a good Elohim loyal to God, or a fallen evil celestial being? Perhaps, maybe it's Satan himself. 2, is the fallen star with the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit, is it the same as the angel in Revelation chapter 20 verse 1, which says, I saw an angel coming down from heaven holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain? 3rd issue, if one opts for the fallen star being evil, is that fallen star the same being as Abaddon in verse 11? Now, let's talk about some multiple views. Un's view is that the fallen star of Revelation 9:1 is a good angel. But it's not the same as the one in verse 11. So the celestial being in verse 1 is not the Abaddon or Apollyon of verse 11. That he's an angel, Un argues, is based on the parallel passage in chapter 20, verse 1. I saw an angel coming down from heaven holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. Un says Revelation 21 is so similar to Revelation 9:1 that it's obvious that this is a supernatural being. But the angel mentioned in verse 11, Abaddon, is not the same as verse 1. So Un writes, John does not actually say he saw the star fall. He says he saw a star after it had fallen. So chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, it becomes obvious that the star, which we've already said is a supernatural being, and in early Jewish literature, oftentimes stars represented angelic beings, or demons, or it could even represent Satan. So here, the fallen star, when we're tracking with Un, this is stuff from his commentary, should be understood as an angelic messenger. It's not to be identified with the angel of the abyss named Abaddon or Apollyon in verse 11. The angel of 9:11, Abaddon, is only named here in verse 11 and then in some early Jewish Dead Sea Scroll literature, where it references the angel of the pit or the spirit of Abaddon. So continuing with Un, the angel of the pit and the spirit of Abaddon, these 2 titles are alternate ways of describing Belial, the Satan figure in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But, he says in Revelation, it's not at all clear that the angel of the abyss is a designation for Satan. And he says the reason for that is that Satan is carefully named elsewhere with a selection of aliases in two different contexts. Those contexts are in Revelation 12:9 and 20 verse 2. So neither Abaddon nor the angel of the abyss is mentioned again, just in that one section in 9:11. So the fact that Angelion in Revelation 9:11 has the definite article, so it's a particular, a specific angel, suggests that the author expected his readers to be familiar with who this angel is. All right, make sure I'm on the right slide. Here we go. There we go. Now we're on the right slide. In other words, that the angel of the abyss is none other than the Satan Belial. So even though we're not certain, he's saying that John's making that connection for us. So Abaddon is a Hebrew term for the kingdom of the dead, and these passages that you see in blue reference this term Abaddon with the realm of the dead. So it's used as a poetic parallel to Sheol, death, the grave, and the abyss. And we're talking about Abaddon. So Un is saying Abaddon could be Satan, but we just don't know. So it's not certain, but there's pretty good tie-in. It could be. However, he's saying that the angel who is called Abaddon is definitely different than the angel at chapter 9, verse 1, and then that's going to be different than in Revelation 20, verse 1. Now, the key in Un's thinking is that 9:1, the fallen star, should be understood as an angelic messenger because of the parallel in Revelation 21, and not identified with this angel of the abyss named Abaddon. So, Un says there's a good angel in 9:1 and 21. Okay, other scholars, as Don mentioned, there's lots of debate on these things. So other scholars are going to say that the angel of 9:1 is evil, even though it's not Abaddon. Now, here's why all this matters. Okay, the advantage of having a good angel, both at 9:1 and 21, is for consistency. So there's no indication that the angel of 21, who holds the key to the abyss, is evil. He's going to bind Satan. An evil angel is not going to bind Satan. And if the angel in 9:1 is evil, while the one in 21 is good, then you've got two different angels, each with keys to the abyss. So that doesn't make sense. Right? So Un is saying we have a good angel both in 9:1 and 21. And it's probably the same angel. The same angel with just two different missions. In 9:1, the angel's mission is to release the forces under the command of Abaddon, verse 11, that figure mentioned there. And in 21, the same angel has the mission of coming back to the abyss. This time, he binds Satan. So as far as the identification of the angel, the best candidate for that, if you're looking at Old Testament literature, Second Temple literature, is Uriel, who's an archangel in 1 Enoch, who was chief over Tartarus. Tartarus is the abyss where the watchers are being held. You get that from 1 Enoch chapter 19 and chapter 20. Another weaker option would be Seraquel, another angel in 1 Enoch who was over the spirits who sin in the spirit. But Uriel is specifically associated with the pit and with Tartarus. Now, going to track a little bit here with Beale. He objects to both options. And for him, so I don't want you to get lost in this. He's looking for exact word-to-word matches, and because he doesn't see the exact word-to-word matches, he's just going to reject it. So let's go with his argument. because he says First Enoch never calls either one of them a fallen star. Well, they didn't have the same words, so it can't be the same. He reserves that language for evil fallen angels. So Beale rejects the idea that 9:1 is a good angel. So his view is that the angel in 9:1 is an evil being. Beale says First Enoch never calls the archangel Uriel, the archangel Seraquil fallen stars. Doesn't use that terminology. Again, and for him, fallen stars means evil. Instead, the description is reserved exclusively for fallen angels under the confinement of archangels. So Beale's take is the star should rather be interpreted as the same star in 8:10, chapter 8, verse 10, because of the parallel wording. A star fell from heaven. Well, there you got fell. He's looking for exact word matches. Revelation 8:10, you've got it up on your screen. Third angel blew his trumpet. Don talked about it. A great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers, on springs and water. The name of the star is Wormwood. So Beale's interpretation is interpreting the great star as a evil, fallen entity. Here's the problem with his view. If the fallen star Wormwood is an evil celestial being, of course not an asteroid, not, some thing coming out of the sky, why is he obeying the trumpet call of a good angel? Evil angels don't obey good angels. Why can't this just be an obedient angel wrecking chaos in judgment? Just like the angels who wrecked chaos with the plagues back in Egypt. If you remember Psalm 78, we talked about a company of destroying angels who were mediating the plagues. And since the plagues, as Don talked about, are a clear parallel to these trumpets, why can't we conclude that the entity in chapter 8 is a good guy too, the Wormwood guy? Doesn't have to be evil. So Beale's answer is, well, he's referred to as fallen. Again, word to word, he's looking for that. And if the angel in 9:1 is evil because of the fallen language, then would that make the angel in chapter 20, verse 1, also evil? Now, in chapter 20, verse 1, the word fallen doesn't occur, but yet they both have keys to the abyss. So Beale says, well, in Revelation chapter 21, verse 1, well, that's a good guy. Because, guess what? John doesn't use the word fallen. It's that one-to-one correlation. Okay, well, if that's the case, now you wind up with two angels having keys to the abyss, to the pit. So are there two keys? And if the first one is evil, why did he respond to the trumpet call? Why obey God's judgment call? If you're an angel in rebellion, why are you obeying now? So none of that makes sense. So we're just going to reject Beale's opinion here. There's no problem with having a good angel in Revelation 9:1 who releases the watchers because it's part of their day of the judgment, their day of judgment. This is not a jailbreak. They're not breaking out of jail. They're being released ultimately to their own doom. This sequence of events is initiating the day of the Lord. Revelation 8:10, Revelation 9:1, Revelation 21 are all good angels. Revelation 9:11, however, is Abaddon or Apollyon, is evil. Maybe it's referring to Satan. All right. There's also another logical flaw to having the angel of 9:1 be an evil being, one revealed by understanding what the abyss is. So this phrase, bottomless pit, in Greek is abyssos. So that's abyssos is abyss. In Revelation chapter 20, the first 3 verses, has this same term as being the place where Satan dwells. And so it can be understood as a partial synonym for Hades. Hades is the place of the dead, it's the realm of the dead. I say partial synonym for Hades. So Hades, we're not the place here, not the personified being, the deity that we talked about with the keys passage in Revelation 1:18. So it can be understood as a partial synonym for the realm of the dead. Un's going to write in Revelation, the beast ascends from the abyss. That's Revelation 11:7 and 17:8. And it is also the abode of Satan, chapter 20. The abode of the angel of the abyss, Abaddon or Apollyon, and of demons, chapter 9, verses 1 through 10. So this abyss sounds like it's the realm of the dead where Satan lives, but there's a partial, I keep saying there's a partial reason, it's a partial synonym, not a total overlap, but partly overlaps. In 1 Enoch chapter 10, the abyss is a place where the offending watchers, the sons of God from Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, are imprisoned, and in 1 Enoch for 70 generations. So the relationship between the abyss and the realm of the dead is indicated by the fact that some members of the abyss, and we talked about this weeks earlier, are imprisoned. It's a subset. The abyss is the prison in the realm of the dead. Think Sheol, the underworld, the realm of the dead. All people die, all people go to the underworld, to Sheol, to the realm of the dead. But a subsection of that is the abyss, which is the prison. And that would be where the watchers are from Genesis 6. Whereas the others, Satan, demons, they're not imprisoned. But he's the Lord of the dead, right? So he has access to that underworld, Sheol, realm of the dead. So there can't be a total overlap between the abyss and the realm of the dead. It's better to view, as I said, the abyss as a sublocation within the realm of the dead. And in the book of Enoch, Enoch visits the abyss in 1 Enoch chapter 27, and this is how the Jews would have thought about the abyss or the prison. All right. So I'm getting into a lot of Second Temple literature here because John's using this same terminology. So 1 Enoch 21, we're going to go through some of this. I'm going to hit some highlights. Enoch goes and he sees a great fire that was burning and flaming, pouring out great pillars of fire. Uriel, one of the holy angels who was supervising this place, said to him, "Hey, this place is the prison house of the angels." Okay, which angels? Which angels are in prison? It's a reference to the watchers in context. They are detained here forever. The word forever just means a very long time. It doesn't literally mean forever. Elsewhere in Enoch, they're imprisoned for 70 generations, or until the time of the end. So this abyss is the chief parallel to the lake of fire in the New Testament, which is alluded to in chapter 20, verse 10, and also Matthew 25:41, a place made for the devil and his angels. So this is the place of the final judgment, and ultimately both human unbelievers and the devil and his angels will be imprisoned there. This is lake of fire, the final prison. All right, now here's the point. Let's go back to Revelation 1:18. The phrase death and Hades. We discussed the word keys. And in 1:18, the keys of death and Hades, and then also in chapter 3, verse 7, the key of David. Recall, Jesus took the keys from death and Hades, those personified entities, those Greek gods, and it wasn't just a place in those passages. So these are evil supernatural beings called death and Hades. Jesus takes the keys from them, and now Jesus is the master of life and death because he descends there, he rises from the dead, and so it just doesn't make any sense for Jesus to hand the keys back to an evil angel in Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. So that's kind of why we're going to not follow Beale in his second option. Just doesn't make good sense. It's far better to just have one good angel who's loyal to God, who's loyal to the risen Christ in both 9:1 and in 20 verse 1, who has a single key. And it makes sense to hand that single key to the angel and say, go unlock the abyss, or go do this and that. It doesn't make any sense to hand that key over to a rebel. All right. So the abyss is also a metaphor in the Old Testament for chaos. So Beale and McDonough, the abyss in the LXX Septuagint Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, is always related to water, whether it be the chaotic waters, the primeval deep of the creation account, or the waters of the sea, or it could even be the waters below the earth. So all of these could be symbolically associated with evil forces. However, by the New Testament times, the abyss was spoken of more broadly as a place of punishment or as confinement for wicked spirits. Okay, when we say wicked spirits, it's either the disembodied dead or disembodied dead humans, human spirits, or demons, or Satan, or Abaddon. So these are by nature all disembodied beings. So here we're not in the physical realm anymore. These are all metaphors for the part of the spiritual world where evil exists and is confined. Plus, ultimately, where also the unbelieving dead are going to be. That's people that are going to be judged, humans. So that's why it can be referred to as watery and also fiery. So how can water be fiery? Well, they're metaphors. And because they're symbols of chaos. Fiery, symbols of judgment. Water, symbol of chaos. So symbols of judgment and death. It's something that is frightening, something that can harm you. So, what is released from the pit? Verses 3 through 10, Stephen Thompson says, I think this is the release of those sons of God from Genesis 6, known as the Watchers in Second Temple literature from before the flood. And a number of scholars take this view. Thompson writes in his book, The End of Satan, the most suitable sequel to the time of imprisonment described in 1 Enoch 10 can be found in Revelation chapter 9, where the key to the abyss is given to a fallen star, and he's going to tag it here as the fifth trumpet blowing angel, so good angel, who uses it to open the shaft of the abyss to facilitate the release of the imprisoned demonic forces, who emerged to terrorize earth dwellers. So, here's the point. This is the group from Genesis 6, the sons of God who come down, take human women, they cross a boundary, they violate their covenant with God, they produce the Nephilim, and they are put into prison in Tartarus. So these are the Watchers. They're evil, fallen, sinful, supernatural beings who are imprisoned. And this is in all of Second Temple Jewish literature. So this is, well, I'll get to that in a second. So there's clearly a contextual relationship between Revelation 9 and the Enoch material and Second Temple Jewish material that has the original offending Watchers imprisoned in the pit to await final judgment. So where would you find it? You're going to find it in Enoch, Jubilees, 2 Peter. 2 Peter 2:4 is important because it uses the verb tartarao, Tartarus. So the Greek is Tartarus, according to Enoch, is where the Watchers are imprisoned, but it's also in Greek literature where the Titans are imprisoned. Titans are demigods, half part human, part God. Right? So that's what the Nephilim are. So the Watchers are imprisoned there. They're supervised by Uriel. So the realm of the dead abyss is home to these guys. The abyss is the prison in the realm of the dead, but the realm of the dead is also home to their disembodied offspring. The demons, the unclean spirits, the evil spirits, those would be what Jesus encounters in the Gospels, and the disembodied spirits of the giants who were killed. So the main source of all this is a guy named Archie Wright, his book on the origin of evil spirits, also Wayland's book on unclean spirits, and there's just a truckload of material on this that goes through the Second Temple Jewish literature, talks about the origin of demons being the disembodied spirits of the giants, the descendants of the Nephilim, and their offspring, the Rephaim, show up in Sheol in Isaiah 14:9. Also, Luke has this passage on Legion. Remember the guy who's got he's possessed, and he's like, what's your name? Legion. So Legion means 1,000, and he says there's many of us, and so he says, let us go into the pigs. Don't send us to the abyss, right? So in verse 1, they beg Jesus not to command them to depart into the abyss. So what did we say the abyss was? Jail, the prison, right. It's not just to the underworld, the netherworld. It's not just Sheol. It's not just the realm of the dead. So it wouldn't make any sense if they begged him not to make them depart to where they live, like don't go home. But this is the abyss, so this is the prison. It's not bad if you get sent to Sheol, but it's real bad if you get sent to the prison, because then you can't get out. So in the text there, he sends them into the pigs. Then where do the pigs go? Yeah, but isn't it called the abyss in the text? So they still go to prison. So now, who's getting let out? Not just the watchers, but these guys. Not the pigs, but the legion. The legion. So they were in prison too. The New Testament is part of this Second Temple environment, and the literature here is very consistent. So this subject, where do demons come from? The imprisonment of the watchers. It's one of the very few subjects in Second Temple Jewish literature where all the text agree. So you've got the watchers in the abyss. You've got demons in Sheol, the realm of the dead. But here, the legion spirits specifically are in the abyss too, prison. Satan and these other rebels are only in the realm of the dead, Sheol. They can go back and forth because they're not in the abyss. Remember, it was made for him, and he'll eventually be there. So the abyss is a special compartment in hell or the underworld or the realm of the dead, and it's the prison. Okay, so let's talk about this bizarre description. This is out of Reversing Herman. The beings released from the abyss is locusts, verse 3, that were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces. Their hair like women's hair. Their teeth like lions' teeth. Verses 7 and 8 does not undermine their identification as the fallen watchers. What you have here is hybridized theriomorphic. There's your academic word. Hybridized theriomorphic. It's a word that means animal-shaped or animal-like descriptions applied to demonic spirits, which was very common in ancient Jewish and classical literature. So this is the way supernatural evil spirits are described to try to convey their voraciousness, their violence, their ugliness, their freakishness, all those types of things. So Beale and McDonough note the Old Testament connections to the appearance of these locusts, and textually, there's only one candidate. It's the fallen watchers. It's the disembodied spirits of the watchers, and it's the watchers that are not allowed out. So they write, the portrayal in chapter 9, 7 through 9, is based on Joel 1 and 2. We just looked at that with Don. Joel 1 and 2 was what the first four trumpets, part of it, were tracking with, which describe a plague of locusts devastating Israel's land. The locust judgment in Joel 2 is introduced and concluded with a phrase, get this, the sound of the trumpet. It's in 2:1 and 15 in Joel. So that should be ringing a bell. The judgment in Joel is modeled on the plague of locusts in Exodus 10. So Jewish tradition held that in Sheol and Abaddon, there were angels of destruction who were in authority over thousands of scorpions. These beings have scorpion tails. So this is some rabbinic information. This is not Second Temple, so it's much later. The sting of the scorpions, thought to be in this prison in the abyss, was lethal. However, some of the stings do not kill. Remember, they just torture, but they only torment the inhabitants of hell. Beale says, he's quoting the Testament of Solomon here, that speaks of demons who have wings, fly, and resemble human-like lions. There you get the lion teeth element, and then there's a whole lot of Old Testament backdrop imagery to the description of the released watchers, these released supernatural prisoners that exist. Okay, here's the point. We're not talking about modern warfare machinery. Everything we've been looking at here in chapter 9 comes from the Old Testament. Even in Joel 1 and 2, the locust, the sound of the trumpet, and Beale writes that the locusts execute judgment implied by their association with smoke. And he says, could Isaiah 14:29 and 31 be in the background, since that has flying serpents, portrays an enemy who will oppress and demoralize. So the wording of this expression is based on Exodus chapter 10, verse 12, which introduces the locust plague against Egypt. So the fifth trumpet is partially modeled literarily and thematically on the Exodus plagues, as were the previous ones, the first four. The locusts in Exodus 10:15, remember they destroyed the land and devoured the vegetation and all the fruit of the trees, and there was no green thing left on the trees in Exodus. But here, the locusts are commissioned not to harm the grass of the earth or any green thing or any tree. Here, they're only going to harm unbelievers, those who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads, but have the mark of the beast on their foreheads. So in Deuteronomy chapter 28, it also predicts that in the latter days, Israel is going to suffer the plagues of Egypt, including the plague of locusts, because of idolatry, faithlessness, unfaithfulness to Yahweh. Detailed description is now given of the locust. So the use of the word likeness and repeated like in verses 7 to 10 expresses basically John's, he's not really able to describe precisely what he's seen. He just keeps saying it's like this or it's like that. So the vision sparks in his mind similar scenes from the Old Testament, based on his understanding of how the vision relates to the Old Testament prophetic tradition. All right, the portrayal in verses 7 through 9, based on Joel 1 and 2, describes a plague of locusts devastating Israel's land. And the issue for us, it doesn't really matter if it's literal or figurative, but a trumpet has signaled the coming of the locust in Revelation 9:1. Also in Joel 2, the locust judgment is introduced and concluded with the sound of a trumpet. So this judgment in Joel is modeled on the plague of locusts in Exodus 10. So I want you to look at the clear allusions here. Joel chapter 1 verse 2, chapter 2 verse 2, models equals similar Exodus 10:6. You just track down there. So the locusts are said to be like horses prepared for battle. The locusts or horses have faces like human faces. Joel 2, 4, and 7 describes the locusts there as like the appearance of horses and like war horses, like a mighty people arranged for battle, like mighty men, like soldiers, and the iron breastplates as part of the armor of a soldier or a battle horse in Job chapter 39. And then Nahum likens the scaled armor of Assyrian soldiers to the scaled thoraxes of locusts. So this may allude partly also to Job 39, 19 to 25, which describes the war horse going forth only at the trumpet sound. I think that might be that passage they read in Secretariat in that movie when you've got the horse galloping. So the war horse going forth only at the trumpet sound, clothed in terror and perfect armor. So we have Job 39 using trumpet language and the armor language, the war horse, and who leaps. This is also these horses that are armored and go forth at the trumpet. That says they leap like locust in Job chapter 39. The sound of the locust wings is a sound of chariots and many horses running into battle. That alludes to Joel chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. So again, appearance, like the appearance of horses, like war horses. They run, they sound like chariots. They leap on the tops of mountains, arranged for battle. Arranged for battle. Included are echoes of Jeremiah chapter 51. I will fill you with people like locusts, and they will cry out. Jeremiah 51 uses the phrase, bring up the horses like bristly locusts. And this allusion is confirmed in that Jeremiah 51:27 is introduced by a third reference to a sound of the trumpet among the nations. So we've got three references that associate locust and trumpets from the Old Testament. So back to Beel, in the same way that a trumpet has signaled the coming of the locust here in Revelation, you get all these Old Testament passages doing it. The second trumpet is what Don talked about back in chapter 8, verses 8 and 9, has already alluded to the burned out mountain cast into the sea, and he's referencing Jeremiah 51:25, 63 through 64. And we said the burned out mountain it's a nation, it's an evil nation, stands for Babylon. So we have here a continuation of the earlier allusion. So trumpet 2, continuation in trumpet 5. We haven't got to 6 yet. Yep. So Beel is saying the earlier trumpets use Jeremiah 51, and trumpet 5 is using Jeremiah 51 as well for the locust stuff. So Beel's third observation is in the LXX, which is the Septuagint of Jeremiah 51:27, is actually closer to Revelation than the Masoretic text. Bring up horses against her as a multitude of locusts. So the allusion reinforces the idea that the trumpet woes are directed against idolatrous persecutors outside the church, since Jeremiah 51 is an announcement of coming vindication for Israel against idolatrous Babylon. So, context of Jeremiah 51 is Babylon, who has wrongfully come against Israel and its temple. So, they've wrongfully come against Israel and its temple. They desecrated it, destroyed it, but who's the temple in the New Testament? Believers. So Babylon has now come against believers. So that's Jeremiah 51:11. All right, so why go through all this data? Well, if you're going to read these passages like it's modern warfare and these are, modern weapons, then you might as well just throw out your Old Testament. Because that's what John's using. All right, sixth trumpet. Sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who were bound at the great river Euphrates. So the 4 angels, who had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year, were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000, times 10,000. I heard their number. And this is how I saw the horses in my vision and those who rode them. They wore breastplates, the color of fire and of sapphire and of sulfur, and the heads of horses were like lions' heads. And fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. By these 3 plagues, a third of mankind was killed by the fire, the smoke, and the sulfur coming out of their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails are like serpents with heads, and by means of them they wound. The rest of mankind were not killed by these plagues, did not repent of the works of their hands, nor give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or walk, nor did they repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. Okay, all that to say, basically they just stayed unbelievers. They stayed hostile to the Lord. So, this again is describing the release of supernatural evil. The prison, the abyss, is emptied for a short time. And ultimately, all of this is going to lead to a showdown. It's a judgment. So God uses them to judge the unbeliever on earth. And it leads to the big showdown that's going to happen in Revelation chapter 20, which is going to be their ultimate doom. The prison's empty, so we have all the players back on the chessboard. Nobody's in the box. The final conflict is going to be a war between all of the supernatural forces of evil and those humans who remain loyal to them, who have the mark of the beast, against God, against Jesus. This is spiritual warfare in its ultimate. And the target is earth. They're going to surround what? Yeah, not Megiddo, Jerusalem. It's one final showdown. All right, golden altar. Un has a quote. The term translated altar occurs 8 times in Revelation, 4 of which refer to the heavenly counterpart of the Israelite earthly altar of incense, and 4 to the heavenly counterpart of the altar of burnt offerings. So he's saying it could be either one. Since it is explicitly said that the golden altar is before God, the voice from the 4 horns of the altar cannot be the voice of God. So this voice is different than God's voice. Chapter 8, verses 3 through 5, an angel functioning as a heavenly priest was depicted as standing by the golden altar. So it's possible that this unidentified voice could be the angel from chapter 8, verses 3 through 5. So a portion of Revelation 9, 13 to 21 is hearkening back to some of those things. And the altar we've seen before, it's the throne room of God, it's the heavenly temple, and back in Revelation chapter 8 we talked about this. In Revelation 6 we also hit the altar. Remember what we said? Ultimate protection spiritually, it's divine protection. Those who are under the altar of it provides us. It's those who are with Yahweh and loyal to Him will come out on the other side. So it's divine protection in that. They will not be those cast into the lake of fire. So Beel and McDonough on the rivers, and they say that the 4 angels, and they're presuming they're wicked angels, are held back at the great river Euphrates, evokes the Old Testament prophecy of the northern enemy beyond the Euphrates, whom God would bring to judge sinful Israel. Babylon was brought to judge Israel. Babylon was evil, so the 4 angels could be evil that God uses to judge His people. So this is it's kind of the foe from the north idea. Between 2 Edens, we covered this a great deal. We may have talked about it in here at some point. This is found in Isaiah, in Jeremiah, in Ezekiel, and in Joel. So they're all part of the enemy from the north. Now, when we talk about the enemy from the north, we're not just talking about the geographic north. We're talking about the cosmic north. It's Saphon. Saphon is the domain of Baal. It's where Baal and his council were. So Saphon language of the Old Testament relates not just to invading human armies. So human armies would come from Persia, from Babylon. They would go up north and come down the Fertile Crescent to attack Israel. But it's not just those who are coming, human armies that are coming down the Fertile Crescent to wreak havoc, but it's also the idea that there are cosmic powers up to the north, because that's where Ugarit is. It's where Baal's mountain is. So cosmic evil comes from the north, the supernatural north, the celestial north. And that's what's in view here. All right, so Beale and McDonough write, the invaders were characterized as a terrifying army on horses, chariots, arising from the north. This echoes Jeremiah 46, especially strong in Revelation chapter 9. And the description of the creatures is in the sixth trumpet echoes Job's portrait of the sea dragon, which is a symbol of cosmic evil in Job chapters 40 and 41. So this enhances the identification of these creatures with Satan and his deceptive work. So the Leviathan is an agent of chaos. So that's what's talking about the sea creature. They're talking there about the serpentine imagery with the horses' tails. So it's very consistent with the sea dragon idea, Leviathan. It's cosmic evil, it's chaos. And while it's clear that the hordes here are demonic, that does not eliminate the possibility of human armies, because you've actually got both going on here. All right. So I'm going to disagree with what Oon says here, but we're going to read what he says. The army of 10,000s appears to be a demonic rather than a human army. Then he quotes the Babylonian Talmud. But here's the issue. There's nothing in the Bible about that. This is kind of Jewish rabbis, and they're kind of making stuff up. So Oon's saying it's a demonic army. An entirely demonic army would be totally inconsistent with Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 10. And here's why I say that. Because what's being articulated in Revelation 9 is the release of the Watchers. You're putting all the chess pieces back on the chessboard, and they're going to wreak havoc. God's ultimately going to use them to judge those who have the mark of the beast, which would be human. And that's kind of the setup, and it's like the plagues in that respect, but it's going to lead to this ultimate showdown in Jerusalem for everything. And that's going to involve human forces. Human forces are going to attack Jerusalem as well as supernatural forces. So we see that in Revelation chapter 20, verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come, will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their numbers like the sand of the sea, and they march up over the broad plain of the earth and surround the camp of the saints, the holy ones, and the beloved city, which is Jerusalem. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. All right. Now this description that we just read it doesn't say myriads upon myriads, and thousands of 10,000s, but you have this description like the sand of the sea, which has been used in the Abram. Your descendants will be like the sand of the sea. It's used in referencing humans, not supernatural beings. And that coincides with the language of Revelation 9. So in Revelation 20 that we just read, you have nations being deceived, you have Jerusalem being surrounded, and that description kind of has the marks of an earthly army. So Revelation 20:10 has the devil deceiving this force. So the army must be understood, at least in part, as human enemies and warriors, because demons don't need to be deceived to march against Jerusalem. Satan doesn't need to deceive evil spirits or rebellious Elohim that are powers, principalities, and rulers. So you've got both going on here. This is the war of gods and men. It's the final apocalyptic conflict. This is Armageddon. Now, I'm just going to pick on a system here for a second. If you're a splitter, you're probably a bit confused, because in Revelation chapter 20, verse 7, it said, when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison. And Revelation 20:10 is after the millennium. And Armageddon is actually 1,000 years before that. Gog and Magog is 1,000 years is after the millennium. Armageddon's before the millennium. But we're talking about this at the same point. So your theological system may tell you they're separated. But there are things that happen in Revelation chapter 20 that occur earlier in the book of Revelation, and that attach to Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is the Gog-Magog chapters. So what I'm saying is this is not linear chronology. It's what Don mentioned earlier. It's the reiterative cycling through the same events. So that's one of the reasons we're not focusing on theological systems. Later in Revelation, we're going to see how these things cycle through and mirror each other again. So there's stuff in Revelation chapter 8, in Revelation chapter 9, in 13, 17, and 20 that are all basically the same. This is where you get what's called the recapitulation view of Revelation, where you don't have a linear chronology of events. Now, you do have some linear chronology. There is some progression, but you also have events that are described in cycles. So Revelation may describe an event with 5 or 6 motifs, and then the same event again gets described with 5 or 6 motifs. And then maybe the next time it's described, you add another one. And then it cycles through a third time and a fourth time. So it kind of loops like a Ferris wheel. It's just not linear. It's repeated cycles of the same thing. And if you're only used to interpreting Revelation as linear chronology, then basically you've probably been taught not to see these Old Testament connections. So ultimately, we're going to have much greater amount of clarity if we take Armageddon not as a conflict over Megiddo sometime during the Great Tribulation, just kind of throw all that out, but if you understand Armageddon as a war for Jerusalem, because it says in Hebrew Armageddon, well, Harmageddon in Greek is where you get Armageddon, but John says in Hebrew it's Armageddon, so the Hebrew is Har Moed. Har Moed is the Mount of Assembly. The Mount of Assembly is where God dwells. It's where God's counsel in. It's Zion. It's Jerusalem. So that's the way that we should understand that. So, and then this repetition, this cycling, it doesn't really matter if we understand everything in the repetition. What matters is that we get that this is all building to a climax in Zion. It is a war between supernatural forces and human forces for God's holy city, for Zion, for Jerusalem. How did I get to that one? All right. So, Revelation is leading up to this conflict. So these passages that recycle are going to hook into the same Old Testament passages. John's using Joel 1 and 2. He's using Jeremiah 51. He's using Jeremiah 56 and a couple other passages. But he's also going to use these same passages again elsewhere. And he's already used them in some places. So we're going to see more of the Exodus imagery too. John's using kind of a fairly small set of Old Testament passages, and then he keeps dipping in to those same passages to describe the same series of events. And he's dipping into the same passages not to say something different, but to say the same thing. And if it were linear chronology, why would he keep going back to the exact same passages of stuff he's already alluded to? All right, so that brings us in Old Testament terms to the end of Revelation chapter 9. So in this case, we're saying it's both demonic imagery for supernatural evil beings, but it would also certainly include human armies. And it's basically the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, the judgment that we find there, the human enemies of God are judged, human empires against God's people are being controlled and manipulated. They're under dominion. They're being held captive, enslaved by supernatural princes. Think Daniel chapter 10. And all of that language is drawn from Deuteronomy 32. So, now your cookies. There's a lot of cookies on this one. Okay, fallen star from heaven to earth. It's a supernatural being. It's a good spiritual being in service to Yahweh, has the key to the abyss. And it's in both Revelation 9. It's either, is it 20 or 21? It may be 20. But the bottomless pit, the abyss, it's a partial synonym for Hades, the realm of the dead, realm of Satan and demons. Remember, realm of the dead is broader. Satan and the demons are outside of the abyss, but the abyss itself is a subset, and it's the prison, Tartarus. Genesis 6, the fallen sons of God are imprisoned there, and it's the chief parallel to the lake of fire and the place where the final judgment ultimately of both human unbelievers and the devil and his angels. So abyss, Old Testament metaphor for chaos and underworld prison. So the released from the pit, it's the guys from Genesis 6, sons of God. And it's the legion from the gospel thing. They were put in the abyss. All right. Yeah, it's... There we go. Locusts. They're like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what look like crowns of gold, faces. So these are the hybridized, theriomorphic animal shape or animal-like descriptions applied to demonic spirits to convey their voraciousness, their violence, their ugliness, their freakishness. These trumpet woes are against the idolatrous persecutors outside the church. So they're targeted, their focus is on unbelievers, not believers. Sixth trumpet, release of supernatural evil. The prison's emptied. All the players are back on the chessboard. The four angels who are released to kill a third of mankind, presumably wicked, and it evokes the foe from the north idea, which is the next one, which is cosmic north. It's the domain of Baal and his council. So not only would human armies invade from the north, but this is also where supernatural evil, it's ground zero up in Baal's territory where supernatural evil would come against Israel. The golden altar, it's a counterpart to the heavenly Israelites' earthly incense altar. Foe from the north. We just covered that. Saphon. So human armies would come down. Supernatural beings would come from that area. Golden altar. Looks like. I see. So the voice from the four horns of the altar, possibly the angel in chapter 8, 3 through 5, functioning as a heavenly priest. And the altar image is ultimate protection, spiritually divine protection. Terrifying army on horses, chariots arising from the north. You've got all these Old Testament passages that they're tied to. Serpentine imagery with horses' tails, very consistent with sea dragon, leviathans, cosmic evil, it's chaos. The army of 10,000 of 10,000 is probably a human army. So you've got both human and supernatural forces zeroing in on Jerusalem for the final battle. And then human enemies of God, human empires against God's holy people. They're being controlled, they're being manipulated, they're under dominion of these princes, Daniel 10, of the powers, principalities, and rulers of this dark age. That's Paul's language. It's Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And that is chapter 9. A lot of stuff. All right. Does anybody have a question?
The sixth trumpet talks about killing a third of mankind. Back in the fourth seal, the 12 verse, it says they had authority over the fourth because they had the power to do that. And I mean, and I'm not saying it has to be literally a third, but it's literally a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's saying that a third of mankind collectively.
Yes, it would. So remember the bubonic plague killed a third of Europe? So we said some of this stuff could have been going on. The Great Tribulation could be an already not yet. A lot of this stuff could be already not yet. World War II. But the third is thematically tying back into the Old Testament passages with the plagues of Egypt and previous judgments. So from that standpoint, it's a thematic tie-in, not a literal expectation that it would be 1/3. Like, okay, how many people are on the planet now? 8.21567 billion. Okay, what's a third of that? I don't think it's that.
Probably learned this in a Christmas card, but I always, the millennial reign has always been described as Jesus' reign. They usually use the word peace involved.
Mm-hmm.
So if the battles haven't happened, if the big battle is yet to come, I think we can agree on that. And if we're in the millennium, which is the battles after that, or the Gog and Magog things after that, then where's the peace? How's that add up?
So already not yet. It's a not yet piece. So 1 Corinthians 15 says, talks about that Jesus, after he ascended, he must reign until all enemies are put under his feet. Well, you don't reign if you're not a king. And kings reign over kingdoms. And so we talked about his coronation, that it happened. It was the baptism, then he defeated Satan, then he was crowned the robe, the purple robe, the crown. He was coronated on the cross. Then earlier in Revelation we said, okay, he's coronated, but he's not installed at the throne. He doesn't sit down till Revelation chapter 21 or 22. Remember that? So he's walking amongst the lampstands. He's coronated. He is the king. The kingdom has started, but he's not set down. He hasn't finished. And so it's the best way I'm going to know how to explain it as part of that already, not yet.
Go with two metals being one metal,
The kingdom is already started. When he came, he said the kingdom is near. He's the king. He's coronated. He's ruling today, but he's not accomplished his final objective.
1,000 year wording is another one of those.
Long time. It's an age.
General metaphor.
Yeah, there's lots of metaphors. I mean, that's that view. So, yeah.
It just struck me that there's a parallel between David's waiting to be enthroned and Jesus is waiting to be enthroned.
So Larry said there's a parallel between King David waiting to be enthroned and Jesus waiting to be throned. So he was anointed by Samuel. King David was, and then his enthronement ceremony wasn't for a while till after Saul was actually killed, and then the tribes had to bring him in, and they had an enthronement. Yeah. So coronated and enthronement would be separated. Yeah. So the question is, if humans are bound by chronological time, but Revelation is not tracking chronologically, could it be that spiritual beings are not bound by time themselves? So I don't know. They could be bound by time, but just think, they were there, the morning stars sang at the creation of the earth, at least, that we talked about. And so they've just been around a really long time. We know that one angel took out 186,000 of the Assyrians, so we know they're super strong, supernatural, they're stronger than us. And then we know they're also pretty smart. One of the reasons they're smart is maybe they've been around for thousands upon millennium upon millennium upon millennium. They just keep getting smarter and smarter. So, I don't know about that. All right, well, Father, thank you for this fall semester. And Lord, what we've gleaned from the revelation of Jesus Christ is that we need to be overcomers. We need to hold fast to our believing loyalty to you no matter what comes at us, and that we need to be on mission. You have given us a purpose, and we need to be steadfast in the mission, not leaving our first love, and we need to do it no matter what suffering or persecution comes our way, because we have a promise of eternity with you. And so, Lord, as we take our break, I pray that we would take the things that we've learned so far and just put those things into practice in our daily life to help people know that there is coming a day of judgment. There are things that are probably happening around us and have happened for 2,000 years that are part of it. But there is a day of reckoning, and the people we know and love and you bring in our path, you want to be rightly related to you, and we have the message that can do that. So we thank you, we love you, and we appreciate you. In Jesus' name, amen. No more classes until January.